Hercule Poirot and Murder at the Silent Auction. Chapter 1. The Invitation to Ashwood Manor. Hercule Poirot adjusted his perfectly knotted tie in the mirror of his London flat, his small, precise hands moving with the care of a watchmaker. The morning light filtered through the curtains, casting a soft glow on the polished mahogany of his desk, where a single envelope lay, its cream vellum embossed with gold. The invitation had arrived the previous day, its elegance betraying the wealth of its sender, Lady Beatrice Harrow, mistress of Ashwood Manor, a charity silent auction, it promised, to benefit a hospital in the nearby village of Cresthaven. Poirot's moustache twitched as he considered the request. Charity was noble, yes, but such events often concealed less altruistic motives. Mon ami, he murmured to his reflection, where there is wealth, there is always intrigue. The invitation was no ordinary summons. Lady Beatrice, a widow of considerable fortune and impeccable reputation, had personally penned a note requesting Poirot's presence. "Your discerning eye would lend prestige to our humble gathering," she wrote, her script as ornate as the manner she described. Poirot, ever susceptible to flattery when it was sincere, had accepted. Besides, a weekend in the countryside might stimulate the little grey cells, which had grown restless in the monotony of city life. The journey to Ashwood Manor was a study in contrasts. The train from London rattled through industrial outskirts, before giving way to rolling hills and hedgerows, the air growing crisper as the locomotive neared Cresthaven. Poirot, seated in a first-class carriage, observed his fellow passengers with quiet amusement. A young woman in a fur-trimmed coat clutched a novel, her eyes darting nervously to the window. A portly gentleman with a monocle muttered about stock. Prices? His fingers stained with ink. Were they bound for the auction? Poirot's mind catalogued their faces, a habit as natural to him as breathing. At Cresthaven Station, a chauffeur in a pristine uniform awaited, holding a sign bearing Poirot's name. The drive to Ashwood Manor wound through ancient oaks, their branches forming a canopy over the gravel road. The manor itself emerged like a vision from a Gothic novel. Ivy-clad stone walls, mullioned windows, and turrets that pierced the autumn sky. Poirot stepped from the car, his patent leather shoes crunching on the drive, and inhaled deeply. "C'est magnifique," he said softly, though his eyes narrowed at the sight of a groundskeeper watching from the shadows, his expression unreadable. Inside, the manor's grandeur was overwhelming. A chandelier the size of a small carriage glittered in the entrance hall, its crystals casting prisms on the marble floor. Lady Beatrice Harrow greeted Poirot with a smile that was both warm and calculated. She was a woman of late middle age, her silver hair swept into an elegant chignon, her emerald gown hinting at wealth without ostentation. "Monsieur Poirot, what an honour!" she said, extending a gloved hand. "Your reputation precedes you." "Madame, the honour is mine," Poirot replied, bowing slightly. "Your invitation was most persuasive." She laughed, a sound like delicate glass. "Come, meet our guests. The auction begins this evening, and I dare say you'll find the company stimulating." The drawing-room was a tableau of wealth and ambition. Poirot's keen eyes swept over the assembled guests, each a potential player in the drama he sensed brewing. There was Miss Clara Wentworth, the young heiress from the train, her nervous energy now directed at a glass of sherry. She held too tightly. Beside her stood Mr. Reginald Thorpe, an art dealer with a sharp tongue and sharper eyes, his gaze lingering on a display of auction items in the corner. A retired colonel, Sir Henry Baldwin, puffed on a cigar, his booming voice recounting tales of military campaigns to anyone who would listen. Mrs. Evelyn Carver, a widow with a penchant for pearls and gossip, whispered to a young man Poirot recognized as Julian Marsh. A playwright of modest fame but immodest charm, the auction items, displayed on velvet-draped tables, were a collector's dream. A Ming vase, a first-edition Dickens, and most intriguingly, an emerald brooch said to have belonged to a Russian duchess. Its green facets caught the light, drawing murmurs from the guests. Poirot noted Clara Wentworth's fixation on the brooch, her fingers twitching as if to claim it. Thorpe, too, hovered near the display, his expression one of professional appraisal. Or was it greed? As Lady Beatrice outlined the auction's rules, bids to be placed silently in sealed envelopes, winners announced at midnight, a butler entered, his face pale. Poirot, ever attuned to shifts in demeanour, caught the man's hesitation as he leaned to whisper to his mistress. Lady Beatrice's smile faltered, but she recovered quickly, dismissing the butler with a nod. "A minor matter," she said to the room, though her eyes met Poirot's for a fraction too long. Dinner was a lavish affair, with courses of pheasant and truffle soup served in a dining room lined with ancestral portraits. Poirot, seated between Clara and Sir Henry, listened as the conversation turned to the auction. "That brooch," Clara said softly, her voice trembling. "They say it's cursed. Every owner has met misfortune." Sir Henry scoffed, but Poirot noted the unease in Clara's eyes. Across the table, Thorpe argued with Julian Marsh about the brooch's provenance, their voices rising until Lady Beatrice intervened with a toast to charity. As the guests dispersed to prepare for the auction, Poirot lingered in the dining room, his fingers tracing the edge of his wine-glass. The butler's whisper, Clara's fear, Thorpe's intensity. Each was a thread in a tapestry not yet woven. He stepped into the hall, where the butler, now polishing a silver tray, glanced up. "Monsieur," the man said, his voice low, "things are not always as they seem in this house." Poirot's moustache twitched. "Naturellement," he replied, "and it is for Hercule Poirot to see what others do not." As he ascended the grand staircase to his room, the manor's silence seemed to hum with secrets. The auction, he sensed, would be more than a charitable endeavour. It would be a stage for motives as old as time, greed, envy, perhaps even murder. The little grey cells were already at work, and Poirot knew they would not rest until the truth was revealed. Chapter 2. The silent bids begin. The grand ballroom of Ashwood Manor shimmered under the glow of a dozen chandeliers, their light reflecting off-polished parquet floors and the gilded frames of portraits that lined the walls. Hercule Poirot stood near the entrance, his small, immaculate figure, a quiet contrast to the bustle of guests circling the auction tables. The silent auction had begun, and the air was thick with anticipation, the kind that comes when wealth and desire collide. Poirot's dark eyes, sharp as a hawk's, scanned the room, noting every glance, every gesture. "Mon Dieu," he murmured to himself, "how the human heart reveals itself in the pursuit of treasure." The auction tables, draped in crimson velvet, displayed their wares like jewels in a crown. The Ming vase gleamed with understated elegance, its delicate blue patterns whispering of ancient dynasties. A first-edition Great Expectations, its leather cover worn but proud, drew admiring nods from the literary-minded. But it was the emerald brooch that commanded the room's attention. Encased in a glass dome, its facets caught the chandelier light, casting green sparks that seemed to dance with a life of their own. A card beside it read, Provenance, Duchess Anastasia Romanova, 1890. Reserve, $10,000. Whispers of its supposed curse circulated among the guests, adding a frisson of danger to its allure. Poirot watched as Lady Beatrice Harrow, resplendent in a sapphire gown, moved among her guests, her smile a perfect blend of warmth and control. She paused to adjust the brooch's display, her fingers lingering on the glass as if reluctant to part with it. "A remarkable piece, is it not, Monsieur Poirot?" she said, catching his eye. "Indeed, madame," Poirot replied, his voice smooth as silk. "But it is not the jewel alone that fascinates. It is the stories it carries, n'est-ce pas?" His moustache twitched, sensing her brief hesitation before she laughed and moved on. The bidding process was as discreet as it was cutthroat. Guests wrote their offers on cream-coloured cards, slipping them into locked boxes beside each item. Sheer anonymity of the silent auction, Poirot noted, was a perfect stage for deception. Who among these polished figures hid a desperate need for the brooch, or a darker motive? Miss Clara Wentworth, the nervous heiress, hovered near the brooch's table, her pale hands clutching a bidding card. Her eyes, wide with a mix of fear and longing, darted to the other guests as if expecting a challenge. Poirot recalled her comment at dinner about the brooch's curse, and now he observed her hesitation, her pen poised but unmoving. "Pauvre petite," he thought, "what drives you to such anxiety?" Nearby, Mr. Reginald Thorpe, the art dealer, scribbled furiously on his card, his thin lips pursed in concentration. His suit, though expensive, was slightly frayed at the cuffs, a detail Poirot's meticulous eye did not miss. Thorpe glanced at Clara, his expression a mix of disdain and calculation. Before slipping his bid into the box, Poirot made a mental note. Thorpe's interest in the brooch was not merely professional. Sir Henry Baldwin, the retired colonel, stood by the Ming vase, his ruddy face flushed from brandy. He boasted loudly to Mrs. Evelyn Carver about his collection of antiquities, but his eyes kept straying to the brooch. "Damned fine piece," he muttered, "though I'd not touch it. Cursed, they say." Mrs. Carver, her pearls gleaming, laughed dismissively, but her fingers toyed with her necklace, a nervous tic Poirot catalogued. Julian Marsh, the playwright, leaned against a pillar, his boyish charm drawing admiring glances. He held no bidding card, but his gaze lingered on Clara Wentworth, a faint smile playing on his lips. Was it affection, Poirot wondered, or something more calculated? Julian's reputation as a man of words rather than wealth made his presence at such an auction curious. As the evening wore on, the room grew warmer, the hum of conversation punctuated by the rustle of bidding cards and the clink of champagne. Flutes. Poirot moved to a corner, where a tall window offered a view of the manor's darkened gardens. The butler, Mr. Grayson, passed by, carrying a tray of glasses. His earlier cryptic remark, "Things are not always as they seem," echoed in Poirot's mind. Now Grayson's hands trembled slightly, and his eyes avoided Poirot's. "Interessant," Poirot thought, resolving to speak with the butler later. A sudden hush fell over the room as Lady Beatrice clapped her hands, calling for attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, "the first round of bids closes in 10 minutes. Please ensure your cards are submitted." A flurry of activity followed, with guests hurrying to the tables. Clara Wentworth, her face pale, finally wrote on her card, and slipped it into the brooch's box, her hands shaking. Thorpe watched her, his eyes narrowing. while Sir Henry muttered something about foolish girls and cursed jewels. Poirot's attention was drawn to a side table where a guest he had not yet noticed, a man in his 50s with a gaunt face and wire-rimmed spectacles, examined the Dickens novel. His name, Poirot recalled from the guest list, was Mr. Lawrence Finch, a retired curator with a shadowy past. Finch's fingers traced the book's spine, but his eyes flicked to the brooch, a hungry glint in them. Poirot filed this away, sensing a connection yet to be uncovered. As the clock struck 10, the bidding boxes were sealed, and the guests drifted towards the refreshment tables. Poirot lingered, his mind turning over the evening's observations, Clara's fear, Thorpe's intensity, Finch's secrecy, the butler's unease. The brooch, with its whispered curse, seemed to bind them all, a green thread in a tapestry of motives. The little grey cells, they are awake, Poirot murmured, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. He stepped toward the ballroom's exit, intending to retire for a moment's reflection, when a faint sound, a sharp intake of breath, came from the direction of the art gallery down the hall. The guests, engrossed in their champagne and chatter, noticed nothing, but Poirot's senses were attuned to the smallest discord. He glanced at the gallery door, slightly ajar, and felt a prickle of unease. Something was amiss in Ashwood Manor, and Hercule Poirot was determined to uncover it before the night was through. Chapter 3. A scream in the gallery. The chandelier light of Ashwood Manor's ballroom flickered, casting fleeting shadows across the faces of the guests as the silent auction reached its fevered peak. Hercule Poirot stood near the grand fireplace, his sharp eyes tracking the flurry of last-minute bids. The air buzzed with whispered speculations about the emerald brooch, its rumoured curse lending a thrill to the evening's proceedings. Poirot, however, was distracted by the faint sound he had heard moments before, a sharp intake of breath from the direction of the art gallery. His moustache twitched, a silent signal that his instincts were alert. The clock had just chimed 10:30 when a piercing scream shattered the ballroom's hum. It was a sound raw with terror, slicing through the chatter like a blade. The guests froze, champagne flutes suspended mid-sip, faces turning toward the source. Poirot, already poised for action, moved swiftly towards the gallery door, his small frame cutting through the crowd with surprising authority. "Restez calme, mes amis," he called, his voice steady. "Hercule Poirot will investigate the gallery." A long, dimly lit room adjacent to the ballroom was a shrine to Ashwood Manor's artistic treasures. Paintings in ornate frames lined the walls, their subjects, stern ancestors and pastoral scenes, gazing down impassively. At the far end, beneath a portrait of a door-faced lord, lay the crumpled form of Mr. Lawrence Finch, the retired curator. Poirot had noted earlier. His wire-rimmed spectacles hung askew, one lens cracked, and his lifeless eyes stared at the ceiling. A trickle of blood stained the parquet floor, pooling beneath his head. In his clenched hand was a crumpled piece of paper, its edges torn. Lady Beatrice Harrow, who had followed Poirot, gasped and clutched her pearls. "Oh, heavens! Mr. Finch!" Her voice trembled, but Poirot noted the quick recovery in her posture, a sign of practised composure. Behind her, the guests crowded the doorway, their faces a mosaic of shock and curiosity. Clara Wentworth's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. Reginald Thorpe, the art dealer, pushed forward, his expression unreadable but his hands tightly clasped. Sir Henry Baldwin muttered a curse, while Mrs. Evelyn Carver fanned herself, whispering to Julian Marsh, who stood pale and silent. "S'il vous plaît, step back," Poirot commanded, his tone brooking no argument. He knelt beside the body, his gloved fingers careful not to disturb the scene. Finch's grey suit was dishevelled, a button missing from his cuff. The blood, Poirot observed, came from a wound at the base of his skull, likely inflicted by a heavy object. His eyes scanned the floor, noting a bronze statuette, a small replica of a Greek warrior, lying a few feet away, its base stained with a dark smear. "Intéressant," Poirot murmured, his mind already cataloguing possibilities. He gently pried the paper from Finch's hand, unfolding it with care. It was a torn fragment of a bidding card, the kind used for the auction, but the ink was smudged, rendering the writing illegible save for a single word. Emerald. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Was this a clue to the motive, or a deliberate misdirection? He slipped the paper into his pocket, resolved to examine it later under better light. "Mr. Grayson," Poirot called to the butler, who lingered at the edge of the crowd, his face ashen. "Seal the manor. No one leaves until the police arrive, and fetch a sheet to cover Monsieur Finch." Grayson nodded, his hands trembling as he hurried away. Poirot's gaze swept the room, noting a heavy curtain fluttering near a window. The latch was ajar, a faint draught stirring the air. Had someone entered or exited? The gallery's only other door, leading to a service corridor, was locked, its key hanging on a hook nearby. Turning to the guests, Poirot's voice was calm but firm. "Who last saw Monsieur Finch alive?" A murmur rippled through the crowd, but no one spoke. Clara Wentworth's eyes darted to the floor, and Thorpe shifted uncomfortably. Julian Marsh stepped forward, his voice hesitant. "I saw him in the ballroom, perhaps 20 minutes ago. He was near the auction tables looking at the brooch." "And you, Mademoiselle Wentworth?" Poirot's gaze pinned Clara, who flinched. I passed him in the hall," she stammered. "He seemed distracted." Her fingers twisted. Her shawl, a gesture Poirot noted as betraying more than simple nerves. Lady Beatrice, regaining her composure, addressed the guests. "Please return to the ballroom. We must allow Monsieur Poirot to work." Her tone was authoritative, but Poirot caught a flicker of unease in her eyes. As the guests retreated, whispering among themselves, Poirot remained in the gallery, his mind racing. The statuette, the note, the open window latch, each was a piece of a puzzle, but the picture was far from clear. He approached the auction table in the corner of the gallery, where a few lesser items were displayed. The emerald brooch, still under its glass dome, gleamed untouched in the ballroom. But here, a small silver locket was missing from its stand. Poirot's fingers brushed the empty velvet, his mind turning to the possibility of theft. Was Finch's death tied to the auction, or was it personal? The word emerald on the note suggested the former, but Poirot knew better than to trust first impressions. As Grayson returned with a sheet, Poirot directed him to cover the body, then stepped to the window. The latch was old, its mechanism loose, but there were no clear signs of forced entry. Outside, the gardens were shrouded in darkness, the moon obscured by clouds. The little grey cells, they must work quickly, Poirot thought, sensing the urgency of the moment. He turned back to the gallery, his eyes lingering on the portrait above Finch's body. The lord's painted gaze seemed to mock him, as if guarding the manor's secrets. Poirot straightened, his resolve firm. A man was dead, and Hercule Poirot would not rest until the truth was uncovered. The silent auction had taken a deadly turn, and the game, as he knew it, had only just begun. Chapter 4. The Locked Room. Riddle, the art gallery of Ashwood Manor, now a silent tomb for Lawrence Finch, was bathed in the cold light of wall sconces. Hercule Poirot stood at the centre of the room, his small frame dwarfed by the towering portraits that seemed to watch his every move. The sheet covering Finch's body lay like a shroud, the blood-stain beneath it a stark reminder of the violence that had shattered the evening. The guests had been herded back to the ballroom, their whispers of shock and fear muffled by the heavy oak door. Poirot's dark eyes, sharp and unyielding, surveyed the scene. A locked room, a dead man, and a puzzle, he murmured. C'est un défi pour Hercule Poirot. The gallery presented a conundrum. The door to the ballroom, through which the scream had drawn attention, had been ajar, but the service door at the far end was locked, its key still hanging on a hook nearby. The window, with its loose latch, stood slightly open, admitting a chill breeze that stirred the heavy curtains. Poirot knelt beside the bronze statuette, the suspected murder weapon, its base still smeared with blood. He examined it without touching, noting its weight, sufficient to deliver a fatal blow. Mais pourquoi ici? He wondered. Why was Finch killed in the gallery, and why with such an opportunistic weapon? He moved to the window, his gloved fingers testing the latch. It was old, rusted in places, but showed no signs of tampering. The sill outside was damp from recent rain, yet there were no footprints or disturbed earth in the flower-bed below. Pas d'entrée, pas de sortie, Poirot mused. A locked-room murder, then, or so it appeared. His mind turned to the missing silver locket from the auction table, a detail that nagged at his sense of order. Was it stolen during the chaos, or was it the key to Finch's death? Poirot summoned Mr. Grayson, the butler, whose pale face and trembling hands betrayed his unease. Monsieur Grayson, Poirot began, his voice gentle but probing. You were near the gallery when the scream was heard, oui? Tell me, what did you see? Grayson's eyes flicked to the covered body, then back to Poirot. I was in the service, corridor, sir, preparing trays. I heard the scream and ran to the ballroom door. It was open, and I saw him. His voice faltered. I didn't see anyone else, and the service door. Poirot gestured to the locked door. Was it? Secure, yes, sir. I checked it earlier in the evening. It's always locked during events to prevent theft. Grayson's fingers twisted the hem of his waistcoat, a gesture Poirot noted with interest. Très bien. And the staff, where were they at the time of the scream? Grayson hesitated. Most were in the kitchen or serving in the ballroom, except Molly, the housemaid. She was polishing silver in the east wing. She might have passed the service corridor. Poirot's moustache twitched. Merci, Monsieur Grayson. Send for this Molly, and ensure no one enters the gallery. As the butler departed, Poirot turned his attention to the crumpled bidding card from Finch's hand, now safely in his pocket. He unfolded it under the light of a sconce. The smudged ink revealed little beyond the word emerald, but the card's texture matched those used for the auction. A clue, perhaps, but to what? Molly, a young housemaid with wide eyes and a nervous stammer, arrived moments later. Monsieur Poirot, she said, curtsying awkwardly. I didn't see nothing, I swear. Calmez-vous, mademoiselle, Poirot soothed. Tell me where you were at 10:30. I was in the east wing polishing like Mr. Grayson said, But I did pass the service corridor, fetching more cloths." Her cheeks flushed. "I heard voices, angry ones, near the gallery, but I didn't stop to listen." "Voices?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Male or female? And what did they say?" "I couldn't tell, sir. It was muffled, like they were trying to be quiet. I only heard a bit, something about debts and no more chances. Then it stopped, and I hurried off." Poirot nodded, dismissing her with a gentle smile, but filing away her words. Debts, a motive as old as time. He returned to the auction table, where the empty stand for the silver locket stood out like a missing tooth. The other items, a porcelain, figurine, a jade pendant, remained untouched. The locket's absence suggested a targeted theft. But why leave the more valuable items? He examined the service door, testing the lock. It was sturdy, with no signs of forcing. The key, however, was slightly tarnished, as if handled recently. Poirot's mind raced. Had someone used the service corridor to enter or exit, locking the door behind them? Or was the open window a deliberate misdirection? The statuette, too, puzzled him. It was part of the gallery's decor, not an auction item, suggesting the killer had acted impulsively, or wanted it to appear so. As he paced the room, Poirot's thoughts turned to the guests. Clara Wentworth's fear, Reginald Thorpe's intensity, Sir Henry's bluster, Mrs. Carver's gossip, Julian Marsh's charm. Each could conceal a motive, and Lady Beatrice, with her practised composure, knew more than she let on. The word emerald on the bidding card pointed to the auction centrepiece, but Finch's interest in the locket nagged at Poirot. Was the brooch a red herring, or the heart of the crime? A soft knock interrupted his reverie. Lady Beatrice stood at the doorway, her face pale but composed. "Monsieur Poirot, the police have been called. They'll arrive within the hour. Is there anything you need?" "Only the truth, madame," Poirot replied, his tone mild but piercing. "And perhaps a list of all auction items, including their descriptions." She nodded, her eyes flickering to the covered body. "Of course, I'll have it prepared." As she turned to leave, Poirot caught a glimpse of something in her hand. A small silver key, quickly tucked into her sleeve. He said nothing, but his little grey cells hummed with suspicion. The gallery, with its locked door and open window, was a riddle wrapped in a mystery. Poirot straightened his tie, his resolve firm. The clues were there, the statuette, the locket, the note, the voices. Hercule Poirot would unravel them, piece by piece, until the locked room yielded its secrets. Chapter 5. Shadows of Motive. The ballroom of Ashwood Manor, so recently alive with the thrill of bidding, now felt stifled, the air heavy with suspicion. The guests, confined by Poirot's orders and the impending arrival of the police, clustered in small groups, their whispers like the rustle of dead leaves. Hercule Poirot stood apart, near a marble bust of some long-forgotten Harrow ancestor, his dark eyes scanning the room. The murder of Lawrence Finch had cast a pall over the silent auction, and Poirot knew that beneath the polished veneer of these guests lay motives as tangled as the ivy on the manor's walls. "The heart, it hides much," he murmured, his moustache twitching. "But Hercule Poirot will uncover its secrets." He had requested a small parlour for interviews, and Lady Beatrice, ever the gracious hostess despite her strained composure, had provided one adjacent to the ballroom. This room was intimate, its walls lined with bookshelves and a single window overlooking the darkened gardens. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows that seemed to dance with the manor's secrets. Poirot sat at a mahogany desk, a notebook open before him, his fountain pen poised like a surgeon's scalpel. He would begin with the suspects most likely to reveal or conceal the truth. First was Reginald Thorpe, the art dealer, whose sharp features and frayed cuffs had caught Poirot's attention. Thorpe entered with a swagger that belied his unease, his eyes darting to the door as if expecting an escape. "Monsieur Thorpe?" Poirot began, his voice smooth as velvet. "You were most interested in the emerald brooch, oui? Yet I observe you also examined Monsieur Finch closely." "Why?" Thorpe's lips tightened. Finch was a competitor. He had a knack for sniffing out valuable pieces, then undercutting honest dealers like me. His tone was bitter, and Poirot noted the clench of his fists. "He crossed me once, years ago, over a Renaissance sketch. Cost me a fortune." "Intéressant," Poirot said, his pen scratching a note. "And this grudge, it lingered until tonight?" Thorpe hesitated, then leaned forward. "I didn't kill him, if that's what you're implying. I was in the ballroom, bidding, when that scream came. Ask anyone." His defiance was brittle, and Poirot's eyes narrowed. Thorpe's alibi was convenient, but convenience, in Poirot's experience, often masked lies. Next came Clara Wentworth, the nervous heiress, her pale hands twisting a lace handkerchief. Her eyes, red-rimmed, suggested tears, but Poirot suspected they were as much from fear as grief. "Mademoiselle Wentworth," he said gently, "you spoke of the brooch's curse at dinner. Did Monsieur Finch share your concern?" Clara's gaze dropped to her lap. "He laughed at me when I mentioned it, said I was foolish to believe in curses. But he was so intense about that brooch, always watching it." Her voice trembled. "I saw him arguing with someone in the hall earlier. I couldn't hear much, but he said something about debts unpaid." Poirot's pen paused. Debts again, the same word Molly the housemaid had overheard. "And this argument, who was his opponent?" he asked. "I don't know," Clara whispered. "It was too dark to see clearly, but they sounded angry." Her fingers shredded the handkerchief, and Poirot noted her evasion. Was she protecting someone, or simply too frightened to say more? Sir Henry Baldwin entered next, his military bluster undimmed by the night's events. He sat heavily, his cigar smoke curling toward the ceiling. "Damned shame about Finch," he growled. "Knew him from my club in London. Bit of a sneak, always prying into other people's business." "Vraiment?" Poirot leaned forward. "And what business of yours did he pry into, monsieur?" Sir Henry's face reddened. "Nothing worth killing over. Some investments gone. Sour, that's all. Finch had a way of digging up old debts. Thought he could blackmail me into selling him my Turner painting cheap." He waved a hand dismissively, but Poirot caught the flicker of unease in his eyes. Blackmail was a potent motive, and Sir Henry's bluster did little to dispel suspicion. Mrs. Evelyn Carver, with her pearls and penchant for gossip, was less forthcoming. "I barely knew the man," she said, fanning herself. "He was a curator, wasn't he? Disgraced, I heard, for selling fakes." Her tone was casual, but Poirot noted her quick glance toward the door, as if eager to escape scrutiny. "I was with Julian Marsh all evening," she added. "He'll vouch for me." Julian Marsh, the playwright, was the last to be questioned. His boyish charm was tempered by a pallor that suggested genuine shock. Finch was odd, he said, choosing his words carefully. He approached me last week, asking about Clara, her finances, her family. I told him to mind his own business." Julian's eyes met Poirot's, steady but guarded. "I was with Mrs. Carver when the scream happened. We were discussing the auction." Poirot's pen scratched another note. Alibis were piling up, yet none felt airtight. Thorpe's grudge, Clara's fear, Sir Henry's debts, Mrs. Carver's evasiveness, Julian's protectiveness. Each thread wove a tapestry of motives, but the pattern remained elusive. The missing locket, the smudged bidding card with the word emerald, and the voices overheard in the corridor gnawed at Poirot's mind. And then there was Lady Beatrice's silver key, glimpsed so briefly, yet so deliberately concealed. As Julian left, Poirot leaned back, his fingers steepled. The fire's glow cast his shadow on the wall, a small, precise silhouette against the vastness of the mystery. Finch's death was no random act. It was rooted in the auction, in the brooch, or perhaps in the locket. The locked gallery, with its open window and untouched lock, suggested a killer who knew the manor's secrets. "The little grey cells, they must work harder," Poirot thought, his resolve unyielding. A soft knock announced Grayson, the butler, with a list of auction items as Poirot had requested. "Thank you, monsieur," Poirot said, scanning the list. The silver locket was described as Victorian, engraved with initials LF, a detail that stopped him cold. LF, Lawrence Finch? Was the locket his, or merely a coincidence? He looked up at Grayson, whose eyes avoided his. "One last thing, Monsieur Grayson. This key, the one for the service door, has it been touched tonight?" Grayson paled. I wouldn't know, sir." But his trembling hands told Poirot otherwise. The shadows of motive were lengthening, and Hercule Poirot was determined to step into their light. This chapter deepens the investigation by exploring the motives of key suspects through Poirot's interviews, revealing grudges, debts, and potential blackmail. It introduces new clues, such as the locket's initials and Grayson's unease, while maintaining the locked room mystery's intrigue. If you'd like me to generate additional chapters, revise this one, or focus on specific elements, please let me know. Chapter 6. The Emerald's Curse. The parlour where Hercule Poirot conducted his interviews was now silent, save for the faint crackle of the dying fire. The list of auction items, provided by the butler Grayson, lay on the mahogany desk, its pages illuminated by a single lamp. Poirot's eyes lingered on the entry for the emerald brooch. Provenance: Duchess Anastasia Romanova, 1890. Reputed to carry a curse. The word emerald on the crumpled bidding card, found in Lawrence Finch's hand, had drawn his attention. And now the brooch's dark legend seemed to pulse at the heart of the mystery. A curse, perhaps, or a convenient fiction, Poirot murmured, his moustache twitching, but Hercule Poirot believes in facts, not fables. He rose, adjusting his impeccable lapels, and returned to the ballroom, where the guests remained under the watchful eye of Lady Beatrice Harrow. The chandeliers still glittered, but the mood had soured, the air thick with unease. The emerald brooch, still under its glass dome on the auction table, drew furtive glances, its green facets gleaming like a predator's eyes. Poirot approached the table, noting the sealed bidding box beside it, untouched since the scream had halted the auction. The brooch's allure was undeniable. But was it the motive for murder? Lady Beatrice, Her sapphire gown, catching the light, joined him. "Monsieur Poirot, you seem captivated by our star attraction," she said, her voice steady but her eyes wary. "It's a remarkable piece, though its history is unsettling." "Précisément, madame," Poirot replied. "Tell me of this curse. What tales does it carry?" She hesitated, then gestured to a leather-bound ledger on the table, its pages detailing the auction items. The brooch belonged to Duchess Anastasia, a Russian noblewoman who fled to England after tragedy struck her family. It's said every owner since has met misfortune, bankruptcy, betrayal, even death. Her fingers brushed the glass dome, a gesture almost protective. Superstition, of course, but it adds to the brooch's mystique. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And Monsieur Finch, did he believe in this curse? Lawrence was a skeptic, she said quickly. He was more interested in its value than its lore. Her tone was dismissive, but Poirot noted the slight tightening of her jaw. He turned to the guests, raising his voice just enough to command attention. "Mes amis, a moment, s'il vous plaît. Who among you knows the history of this brooch? Speak freely, for Hercule Poirot seeks only the truth." Clara Wentworth, standing near the fireplace, clutched her shawl. "I told you at dinner, Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice trembling. "It's cursed. My aunt owned it briefly years ago. She lost everything, her fortune, her health, after buying it. I warned Mr. Finch to stay away, but he laughed." Her eyes darted to the brooch, wide with fear. Reginald Thorpe, the art dealer, scoffed from across the room. "Nonsense, Miss Wentworth. It's a fine piece, worth a fortune, but curses, childish tales." Yet his hands, Poirot noticed, were clenched, and his gaze lingered on the brooch with a hunger that belied his words. Sir Henry Baldwin, puffing on a fresh cigar, chimed in. "I've heard the stories. Russian Duchess, murdered lover, all that. Rot. Finch was obsessed with it, though. Kept muttering about hidden value at the club last month." He shrugged, but Poirot caught the unease in his posture, as if the brooch's shadow loomed over him. Mrs. Evelyn Carver, fanning herself, added, "I heard it was stolen once from a collector in Paris. Finch knew him, didn't he? Perhaps that's why he was so keen." Her tone was gossipy, but her eyes flicked nervously to Julian Marsh, who stood silent, his expression unreadable. Poirot filed each comment away, his mind turning to the ledger. He opened it, scanning the brooch's entry. A footnote, written in a hurried hand, caught his eye. Last appraised by L.F., 1923. L.F., Lawrence Finch. The initials matched those on the missing silver locket. A coincidence too striking to ignore. Had Finch's expertise on the brooch made him a target, or was there more to his interest? He approached Clara, whose nervous demeanour intrigued him. "Mademoiselle, this aunt of yours, how did she acquire the brooch?" Clara's fingers twisted her shawl. "She bought it at an auction, like this one. But she sold it quickly, said it brought bad luck. Mr. Finch asked me about her last week, wanted to know where it went after." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I think he was looking for something hidden inside it." "Hidden?" Poirot's eyes sharpened. "A jewel, perhaps, or a secret?" "I don't know," Clara said, shaking her head. "He wouldn't say." Poirot turned to the brooch, lifting the glass dome with care. The emerald gleamed, its setting intricate but unremarkable. Yet Clara's words echoed Sir Henry's mention of hidden value. Was there a compartment, a document, or something more sinister within? He replaced the dome, resolving to examine the brooch later with proper tools. As he stepped back, Grayson the butler approached, his face pale. "Monsieur Poirot, the police are delayed. A storm on the road. They'll be here by morning." His voice was steady, but his hands betrayed him, trembling as he adjusted his cufflinks. "Merci, Monsieur Grayson," Poirot said, his gaze lingering. "And the locket, the one missing from the gallery. Did Monsieur Finch ever mention it?" Grayson's eyes widened briefly. "No, sir. I didn't know it was missing until you mentioned it." His haste to leave was palpable, and Poirot made a mental note to press him further. The guests, growing restless, began to disperse to their rooms, though Poirot's orders kept them within the manor. Lady Beatrice lingered, her silver key now absent from her sleeve, but not from Poirot's memory. The brooch, with its curse and its secrets, seemed to bind Finch's death to the auction. But the missing locket and the voices overheard in the corridor suggested a deeper conspiracy. "The little grey cells, they are restless," Poirot thought, his resolve firm. As he returned to the parlour to review his notes, a faint creak from the hallway caught his ear. The manor, with its secrets and shadows, was alive with whispers. The emerald's curse might be a myth, but the motives it inspired were all too real, and Hercule Poirot would not rest until they were laid bare. Chapter 7. The Midnight Confession. The clock in Ashwood Manor's Grand Hall struck midnight, its chimes echoing through the silent corridors like a warning. Hercule Poirot, unable to rest, had left his guest room to wander the manor's shadowed passages, his mind alight with the puzzle of Lawrence Finch's murder. The emerald brooch, the missing locket, the smudged bidding card, and the voices overheard in the corridor, all swirled in his thoughts, demanding order. "The little grey cells, they do not sleep," he murmured, his patent leather shoes silent on the polished floors. The manor, with its creaking timbers and flickering lamplight, seemed to whisper secrets, and Poirot was determined to listen. He found himself drawn to the library, a cavernous room on the ground floor, its walls lined with leather-bound tomes and its air heavy with the scent of old paper. A single lamp burned on a reading table, casting a golden glow over a scattering of books and a crystal decanter of brandy. Poirot paused at the threshold, his sharp eyes catching a movement in the shadows. A figure sat in a high-backed chair near the fireplace, its embers glowing faintly. It was Julian Marsh, the playwright, his boyish charm replaced by a haggard expression, his hands clutching a glass of brandy. "Monsieur Marsh," Poirot said softly, stepping into the light. "You find sleep elusive, oui?" Julian started, nearly spilling his drink. "Monsieur Poirot, I didn't hear you." His voice was strained, his eyes darting to the door. "I couldn't stay in my room. Not after What happened?" Poirot settled into a chair opposite, his posture relaxed but his gaze piercing. "Naturellement, a murder unsettles the soul, but perhaps you have something to share with Hercule Poirot? Something that weighs upon you?" Julian's fingers tightened on the glass, his knuckles white. After a long silence, he leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "I did something foolish, Monsieur Poirot. I tried to steal a look at the bidding cards for the brooch. I wanted to know who was competing." He swallowed hard. "I didn't touch anything, I swear, but I was near the auction table just before the scream." Poirot's moustache twitched. A confession, but to a minor crime. Too convenient, perhaps, to be the whole truth. Intéressant, he said. And why this interest in the bids, Monsieur Marsh? You are not a man of wealth, no? Julian's face flushed. It was for Clara. She's obsessed with that brooch, but she's terrified of it too. I thought if I knew who else was bidding, I could protect her. His words faltered, and Poirot noted the hesitation, as if Julian were guarding a deeper secret. Protect her from what, précisément? Poirot pressed, his tone gentle but relentless. Julian shook his head, his eyes dropping to the floor. I don't know. She's been so nervous lately, talking about debts and family secrets. Finch was asking her questions, pushing her. I didn't like it. Poirot leaned back, his mind cataloguing this new thread. Debts again, a recurring motif, echoing Molly's overheard voices and Sir Henry's admissions. Before he could probe further, a faint rustle came from behind a bookshelf. Poirot's head turned sharply, his senses alert. Qui est là? He called, rising. Julian froze, his eyes wide. Poirot moved swiftly, his small frame belying his speed, and parted the fuge heavy drapes concealing a nook behind the shelves. There, tucked into a crevice, was a folded letter, its wax seal broken. Poirot retrieved it, noting the faint scent of lavender. Mrs. Carver's perfume, perhaps. The letter, written in a hurried hand, read, Pay what you owe, or the truth about. The locket will be revealed, no more delays. It was unsigned, but the implications were clear. Blackmail. Mon Dieu, Poirot murmured, slipping the letter into his pocket. He turned to Julian, whose face had paled. You knew of this letter, Monsieur Marsh? No. Julian's voice was sharp, almost desperate. I swear, I didn't see it until now. I was just looking for a book. His excuse was feeble, and Poirot's eyes narrowed. Julian's presence in the library, so close to this discovery, was no coincidence. Très bien, Poirot said, his tone deceptively mild. But you will remain in the manor, oui? The truth, it has a way of surfacing. Julian nodded, his hands trembling as he set down the brandy glass and hurried from the room. Alone, Poirot examined the nook where the letter had been hidden. The bookshelf was slightly askew, revealing a narrow gap, perhaps a hiding place used by someone familiar with the manor's secrets. His fingers traced the wood, finding no other clues, but his mind raced. The letter suggested Finch had been blackmailing someone about the locket, whose initials, LF, matched his own. Was Finch the blackmailer, or the victim of one? And why hide the letter here? Poirot stepped to the window, peering into the darkened gardens. A storm was brewing, the wind rattling the panes, and he recalled Grayson's report of the police's delay. The manor felt like a fortress, its inhabitants trapped with their secrets. Lady Beatrice's silver key, glimpsed in the gallery, nagged at him. Did it unlock the service door, or something more sinister? As he returned to the reading table, his eyes fell on a book left open, a history of Russian jewels, with a passage marked about the Romanova emeralds. The text described a hidden compartment in the Duchess's brooch, rumoured to conceal a map to a lost fortune. Poirot's pulse quickened. Clara's hint of a hidden secret, and Sir Henry's talk of hidden value took on new weight. Was the brooch's curse a myth to protect a real treasure? The library door creaked, and Grayson appeared, his face drawn. Monsieur Poirot, The guests are restless. Shall I have tea brought?" "Non, merci," Poirot replied, his gaze steady. "But tell me, Monsieur Grayson, have you ever seen a letter like this in the Manor?" He held up the folded paper, watching Grayson's reaction. The butler's eyes widened briefly, then dropped. "No, sir, never." But his voice shook, and Poirot knew he was lying. As Grayson retreated, Poirot sat, his mind weaving the threads. The blackmail letter, the locket, the brooch's secret. The midnight confession had revealed a conspiracy, and Hercule Poirot was closer to the truth. But the shadows of Ashwood Manor still held their secrets tightly. Chapter 8. The Alibi That Wasn't. The library of Ashwood Manor, where Hercule Poirot had uncovered the blackmail letter, now felt like a sanctuary for his racing thoughts. The midnight hour had passed, and the Manor's corridors were steeped in an uneasy hush, broken only by the distant howl of the storm delaying the police. Poirot sat at the reading table, the blackmail letter and auction ledger before him, his notebook filled with meticulous notes. The murder of Lawrence Finch was a puzzle of many pieces. The emerald brooch, the missing locket, the smudged bidding card, the voices of debts, and no more chances. But it was the timeline of the crime that now occupied his little grey cells. "The truth, it hides in the moments," he murmured, his pen poised, "and Hercule Poirot will find it." He had summoned the key suspects back to the parlour for further questioning, determined to test their alibis against the scream that had marked Finch's death at 10:30. The gallery's locked room mystery, with its open window and untouched service door, suggested a precise sequence of events, and Poirot suspected one alibi would crack under scrutiny. He began with Reginald Thorpe, the art dealer, whose bitterness toward Finch had been palpable. Thorpe entered, his sharp features drawn with fatigue. "Monsieur Thorpe," Poirot said, his voice calm but piercing. "You claim you were in the ballroom, bidding when the scream was heard. Oui? Who can confirm this?" Thorpe's eyes narrowed. "Plenty of people. I was near the auction tables writing a bid for the Mingvas. Ask Lady Beatrice. She passed by me just before." His tone was defiant, but Poirot noted a slight tremor in his hands, betraying nerves. "Très bien," Poirot said, making a note. "And you saw nothing unusual? No one near the gallery door?" "Nothing," Thorpe snapped, but his gaze flickered to the floor, a tell Poirot catalogued. Next came Clara Wentworth, her nervous demeanour more pronounced under the parlour's lamplight. "Mademoiselle," Poirot began gently, "you said you passed Monsieur Finch in the hall before the scream. Where were you at precisely 10:30? Clara's hands twisted her shawl. I was in the ballroom, near the refreshment table. I'd just finished bidding on the brooch." Her voice wavered, and Poirot's eyes sharpened. "Précisément, you are certain?" he pressed. She nodded, but her eyes darted to the window, avoiding his gaze. Poirot made another note, sensing a thread of falsehood. Sir Henry Baldwin, puffing on a cigar, was less cooperative. "I was with Mrs. Carver, discussing the auction," he growled. "We were by the fireplace. Ask her. Finch was poking around, but I didn't see him leave the ballroom." Mrs. Evelyn Carver confirmed Sir Henry's story, her pearls gleaming as she fanned herself. "We were together, Monsieur Poirot. I didn't notice Finch after dinner." Her voice was smooth, but Poirot caught a fleeting glance toward Julian Marsh, who waited his turn. Julian, pale and subdued, repeated his earlier claim. "I was with Mrs. Carver, as she said. We were talking about the Dickens novel when the scream came." His words were steady, but Poirot noted the tension in his shoulders, as if bracing for scrutiny. Lady Beatrice, questioned last, was poised as ever. "I was circulating among the guests, ensuring all was well," she said. "I saw Mr. Thorpe near the auction tables, and Clara by the refreshments. I didn't notice Finch after 10. Her silver key was absent, but Poirot's memory of it lingered. The alibis were consistent, yet Poirot's instincts screamed of deception. He returned to the gallery, now guarded by a footman, to re-examine the scene. The bronze statuette, the murder weapon, lay where he had left it, its blood-stained base, a grim reminder. The open window latch and the locked service door still puzzled him, but a glint near the baseboard caught his eye. Kneeling, he retrieved a broken pocket watch, its face cracked, its hands frozen at 10:27. The initials LF were engraved on the back. Lawrence Finch's, surely. "Mon Dieu," Poirot whispered. The watch placed Finch in the gallery just before the scream, narrowing the timeline. He stood, his mind racing. The watch suggested Finch was alive at 10:27, killed moments before the scream at 10:30. The killer had acted swiftly, using the statuette opportunistically, or so it appeared. But whose alibi faltered in those critical 3 minutes? Poirot recalled Clara's evasiveness, her claim of being at the refreshment table contradicted by her earlier admission of passing Finch in the hall. Had she been closer to the gallery than she let on? He summoned Grayson, the butler, whose trembling hands had become a recurring motif. "Monsieur Grayson," Poirot said, holding up the watch. "This belonged to Monsieur Finch. Did you see him with it tonight?" Grayson's face paled. I think so, sir. He was always checking it, nervous-like, in the ballroom." His voice shook, and Poirot pressed further. "And Mademoiselle Wentworth? You saw her in the ballroom at 10:30. Grayson hesitated. "I saw her near the hall, sir, not the refreshments. She looked upset." His words confirmed Poirot's suspicion. Clara's alibi was false. Returning to the parlour, Poirot reviewed his notes. Clara's lie, the watch's time, the blackmail letter, the missing locket, all pointed to a motive tied to Finch's knowledge. Had Clara, driven by fear of the brooch's curse, or a hidden debt, confronted Finch? Or was her lie protecting another? The voices Molly overheard, speaking of debts and no more chances, echoed in his mind, linking to the blackmail letter. As the storm raged outside, Poirot felt the manor closing in, its secrets tightening like a noose. Sue's broken watch was a beacon, illuminating the timeline, but not the killer. Clara's false alibi was a crack in the facade, and Poirot knew he must widen it. "The truth, it is near," he thought, his resolve unyielding. The alibis were unravelling, and Hercule Poirot would not stop until the murderer's mask was torn away. Chapter 9. Whispers in the East Wing. The storm outside Ashwood Manor raged on, its wind howling like a chorus of restless spirits, rattling the windows and casting eerie shadows across the dimly lit corridors. Hercule Poirot, undeterred by the late hour, had left the parlour where he had uncovered Clara Wentworth's false alibi, the broken pocket watch, frozen at 10:27, and the blackmail letter hinting at secrets tied to the missing locket swirled in his mind. The gallery's locked room mystery remained unsolved, but Poirot's instincts drew him to the Manor's east wing, where Molly the housemaid had overheard voices speaking of debts and no more chances. "The Manor, it hides its truths," he murmured, his patent leather shoes whispering against the polished floors. "But Hercule Poirot will find them." The east wing was quieter than the bustling ballroom, its air cooler and heavy with the high scent of aged wood and wax polish. The corridor stretched long and narrow, flanked by locked doors to unused guest rooms and storage closets. A single gas lamp flickered, casting a golden glow that barely reached the shadows. Poirot moved with purpose, his small frame alert to every sound, every detail. The service corridor, which Molly had mentioned passing through, lay at the far end, adjacent to the gallery's locked service door. Could it hold the key to how the killer entered or escaped? As he approached the corridor's entrance, a low murmur stopped him cold. Voices, angry, hushed, drifted from behind a heavy oak door leading to a sitting room. Poirot pressed himself against the wall, his ears straining. The words were muffled, but their intensity was unmistakable. "You promised it would end," a woman's voice hissed, sharp with desperation. "If they find out, we're ruined." A man's voice, low and tense, replied, "Keep your voice down. It's under control. Finch is gone, isn't he?" Poirot's moustache twitched. The voices were familiar, but the echo of the corridor blurred their owners. Was it Clara, her nerves frayed by fear? Or Mrs. Carver, hiding behind her gossipy facade? The man could be Thorpe, Sir Henry, or even Julian Marsh. Poirot edged closer, careful not to betray his presence, but the voices ceased abruptly, replaced by the creak of a floorboard. He retreated into a shadowed alcove, his heart steady, but his mind racing. The argument suggested complicity, perhaps a conspiracy tied to Finch's death. He waited until the door opened and two figures slipped out, their silhouettes indistinct in the dim light. They moved quickly toward the main hall, leaving Poirot alone. He stepped into the sitting room, its air thick with the scent of lavender. Mrs. Carver's perfume, perhaps, or a deliberate misdirection. The room was sparsely furnished. A velvet settee, a writing desk, and a bookcase against the far wall. Poirot's eyes scanned the space, landing on a rug slightly askew, as if disturbed by hurried footsteps. Kneeling, he lifted the rug and discovered a faint outline in the floorboards, a trapdoor, its edges nearly invisible. His fingers traced the seam, finding a small latch concealed beneath a knothole. With a gentle tug, the trapdoor opened, revealing a narrow passage descending into darkness. "Mon Dieu," Poirot whispered. A hidden passage, perhaps leading to the gallery or the service corridor. This could explain the locked room riddle, how the killer entered or escaped without disturbing the service door's lock or the window's latch. He closed the trapdoor, marking its location in his notebook. Exploring it now, without light or tools, was unwise, but its discovery was a breakthrough. The passage suggested someone with intimate knowledge of the Manor's secrets. Lady Beatrice, perhaps, or Grayson, whose trembling hands betrayed more than he admitted. Poirot rose, his mind turning to the blackmail letter and its mention of the locket. Was the passage used to steal the locket? or to hide evidence of Finch's murder. Returning to the corridor, Poirot noticed a small object glinting near the baseboard, a cufflink, silver, with the initials R.T. Reginald Thorpe. Had he been one of the voices in the argument? Poirot pocketed the cufflink, its weight a tangible clue. Thorpe's bitterness toward Finch, his intense interest in the brooch, and now his presence in the East Wing painted him as a prime suspect. Yet Poirot knew better than to leap to conclusions. The cufflink could be a plant, meant to mislead. He continued to the service corridor, where the gallery's locked door stood. The key, still on its hook, was untouched, but Poirot's sharp eyes caught a faint scratch on the lock's surface, as if it had been tested recently. He recalled Lady Beatrice's silver key, glimpsed in the gallery. Did it fit this lock or another? The voices, the passage, the cufflink, all pointed to a conspiracy, but the motive remained elusive. As he retraced his steps, a faint creak from above drew his attention. The East Wing's upper floor housed guest rooms, and Poirot's instincts urged him to investigate. He climbed a narrow staircase, his steps silent, and paused at a landing where a window overlooked the storm-swept gardens. A flash of lightning illuminated the grounds, revealing a figure hurrying toward the stables. The silhouette was too distant to identify, but its urgency suggested flight or secrecy. Poirot's mind raced. The hidden passage, the overheard argument, the cufflink, and now a mysterious figure. All were threads in the tapestry of Finch's murder. The emerald brooch, with its rumoured curse and hidden compartment, loomed large, but the locket's initials, L.F., suggested a personal connection to Finch. Was he killed for what he knew, or what he possessed? As he descended to the main hall, Grayson appeared, his face pale under the gaslight. "Monsieur Poirot, the guests are demanding answers. They're frightened." His voice was steady, but his eyes avoided Poirot's. "Naturellement," Poirot replied, his tone mild but probing. "And you, Monsieur Grayson, are you frightened?" The butler's silence was answer enough. Poirot returned to the library, his notebook filling with new details. The East Wing had whispered its secrets, and the hidden passage was a key to the locked room riddle. But the voices, the cufflink, and the figure in the storm pointed to a deeper conspiracy, one Poirot was determined to unravel. The truth, it is close, he thought, his little grey cells humming with anticipation. Chapter 10. The Second Betrayal. The storm battering Ashwood Manor had not relented, its thunder rolling like a drumbeat over the tense silence within. Hercule Poirot stood in the library, the faint glow of a gas lamp illuminating his notebook, where the threads of Lawrence Finch's murder were beginning to weave together. The hidden passage in the East Wing, the overheard argument, the silver cufflink with Reginald Thorpe's initials, and the mysterious figure in the storm, all pointed to a conspiracy deeper than a simple murder. Yet Poirot's little grey cells were restless, sensing that the puzzle was incomplete. A second act, perhaps, to complicate the drama, he murmured, his moustache twitching as he closed his notebook and stepped into the corridor. The manor's grand hall was quiet, the guests confined to their rooms under Poirot's orders, awaiting the delayed police. He made his way to the ballroom, where the auction tables stood as silent witnesses to the night's chaos. The emerald, brooch, still under its glass dome, gleamed with an almost malevolent allure. But Poirot's attention was drawn to a nearby table. The first edition Great Expectations, a prize of the auction, was missing, its velvet stand empty. "Mon Dieu," Poirot whispered, "a theft now, alongside murder." The timing was no coincidence. He summoned Grayson, the butler, whose pale face and trembling hands had become a familiar sight. "Monsieur Grayson," Poirot said, his voice calm but sharp, "when was this book last seen?" Grayson's eyes widened, darting to the empty stand. "It was there at the start of the evening, sir. I checked all the items myself before the auction began." His voice faltered. With Mr. Finch's death, I didn't notice it gone." Poirot's gaze narrowed. "And who had access to this table after the scream?" "Only the staff, sir, and the guests milling about before you sealed the gallery. I suppose anyone could have taken it in the chaos." Grayson's hands twisted, and Poirot noted his growing unease. Was the butler hiding something, or merely overwhelmed? Poirot examined the table, noting no signs of forced removal. No disturbed velvet, no scratches on the stand. The theft was deliberate, calculated, likely committed in the moments after Finch's murder, when attention was focused on the gallery. He recalled Julian Marsh's confession of tampering with the bidding cards and Clara Wentworth's false alibi, placing her near the hall. Had one of them seized the opportunity? Or was this theft tied to the missing locket, with its initials LF? Determined to connect the crimes, Poirot sought out Mrs. Evelyn Carver, whose gossipy demeanour masked a sharp mind. He found her in the drawing-room, fanning herself by a window, her pearls catching the lamplight. "Madame Carver." Poirot began, his tone disarming. "You mentioned Monsieur Finch's connection to a stolen jewel in Paris. Did he ever speak of this book, The Great Expectations?" Mrs. Carver's fan paused, her eyes narrowing. "Not directly, but he was always sniffing around rare books. Said they could hide secrets, letters, inscriptions, that sort of thing." She leaned closer, her voice dropping. "I heard he betrayed a partner years ago, a man named Harrow. They were after a book with a hidden document, but Finch sold it out from under him. Ruined the poor man." Poirot's pulse quickened. Harrow, Lady Beatrice's late husband. The connection was electrifying. This partner, he was related to our hostess? Mrs. Carver nodded, her fan resuming its rhythm. "Her brother-in-law, I believe, died in disgrace after Finch's betrayal. Beatrice never speaks of it, but she must have known Finch's history when she invited him." Her tone was casual, but Poirot caught a glint of calculation in her eyes, as if she knew the weight of her words. He excused himself, his mind racing. Finch's betrayal of a Harrow suggested a motive rooted in the past, a grudge that could implicate Lady Beatrice or someone close to her. The stolen book, like the locket, might conceal a secret Finch had uncovered, perhaps tied to the blackmail letter Poirot had found. He returned to the ballroom, where he retrieved the auction ledger, scanning its entry for the Great Expectations. A note read, "Inscribed by Dickens to a private collector, 1861. Appraised by L.F. Finch again, his initials a recurring shadow." Poirot's thoughts turned to the hidden passage in the east wing. Could the thief have used it to slip into the ballroom undetected? He resolved to explore it at first light, but for now he sought out Lady Beatrice. Finding her in her private study, her face pale under the lamplight. "Madame," Poirot said, his voice gentle but probing, "this theft of the book, it is no coincidence, no? And your brother-in-law, betrayed by Monsieur Finch. Did this history influence your invitation to him?" Lady Beatrice's composure faltered, her hand clutching the edge of her desk. "You've been listening to gossip, Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice tight. "My brother-in-law's dealings with Finch were long ago. I invited Lawrence for his expertise, nothing more." But her eyes betrayed her, flickering to a locked drawer in her desk. Poirot noted the drawer, suspecting it held the silver key he had glimpsed. "Bien sûr," he said, bowing slightly. "But the book, the locket, the brooch, they are connected, oui? And you know more than you say." She stiffened, but before she could respond, a distant crash echoed from the east wing, followed by a muffled cry. Poirot's head snapped up, his senses alert. "Restez ici," he ordered, hurrying toward the sound. The corridor was dark, but a broken vase lay shattered near the sitting room where he had found the hidden passage. Footprints in the dust led toward the trapdoor, now slightly ajar. Poirot's heart raced. The second betrayal, Finch's past, treachery, had ignited a chain of events, and the theft was no mere opportunism. The passage, the book, the locket, and the murder were linked by a motive Poirot was closing in on. "The little grey cells, they see the pattern," he thought, his resolve unyielding. The Manor's secrets were unravelling, and Hercule Poirot would not rest until the betrayer was unmasked. Chapter 11. The Puzzle of the Note. The storm outside Ashwood Manor had subsided to a restless murmur, its fading winds no match for the tempest of suspicion within. Hercule Poirot stood in the library, the blackmail letter and the crumpled bidding card from Lawrence Finch's lifeless hand spread before him on the reading table. The card, smudged and torn, bore the word "Emerald," but Poirot's little grey cells had sensed a deeper meaning. The theft of the great expectations, the hidden passage in the east wing, the silver cuff-link with Reginald Thorpe's initials, and Finch's past betrayal of a harrow, all were pieces of a puzzle. But the note was the key. The truth, it hides in the smallest details, Poirot murmured, his moustache twitching as he adjusted his spectacles and leaned closer to the card. Under the lamplight, he noticed faint indentations beneath the smudged ink, marks suggesting something had been written and erased. Using a pencil, he lightly shaded the card, revealing a sequence of numbers, 3, 1, 4, 2. A code, perhaps, or a reference to something specific. Poirot's mind raced, cross-referencing the numbers with the auction ledger. The emerald brooch was lot number 3, the Great Expectations lot 1, the missing locket lot 4, and a jade pendant lot 2. The sequence matched the order of the auction, items suggesting a deliberate message. Was Finch pointing to a connection between these items, or warning of a threat? Poirot's thoughts turned to the blackmail letter. Pay what you owe, or the truth about the locket will be revealed. The locket, with its initials LF, seemed personal to Finch. Yet the Great Expectations theft and the brooch's rumoured hidden compartment suggested a broader conspiracy. The code could indicate the order of importance, or a sequence of actions taken by the killer. Mon Dieu, Poirot whispered. The note, it speaks, but to whom? Determined to test his theory, Poirot requested Lady Beatrice to gather the guests in the ballroom. The police, still delayed by the storm's aftermath, would not arrive until dawn, leaving Poirot to press forward. The ballroom, once a stage for opulent bidding, now felt like a courtroom, its chandeliers casting stark light on the assembled faces. Clara Wentworth clutched her shawl, her eyes red with fear. Reginald Thorpe stood rigid, his frayed cuffs betraying his tension. Sir Henry Baldwin puffed on a cigar, his bluster muted. Mrs. Evelyn Carver fanned herself, her pearls gleaming, while Julian Marsh lingered near Clara, his expression guarded. Lady Beatrice, poised but pale, stood by the auction table, her hands clasped tightly. Mes amis, Poirot began, his voice clear and commanding. The murder of Monsieur Finch is no simple crime. In his hand was a note, a clue he left for us. It speaks of the emerald brooch, but also of other treasures. The locket, the book, the pendant. A code, perhaps, to guide us to his killer. He held up the bidding card, watching the guests. Reactions! Clara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Thorpe's eyes narrowed, his fingers twitching as if to snatch the card. Sir Henry coughed, his cigar smoke curling upward, while Mrs. Carver's fan froze mid-motion. Julian's gaze flicked to Clara, a protective glint in his eyes. Lady Beatrice's composure held, but Poirot caught the slight tremor in her hands. Interessant, he thought, noting each response. The note, he continued, suggests a sequence. The brooch, the book, the locket, the pendant. Why this order? Did Monsieur Finch know a secret these items conceal? He paused, letting the question hang. Or was he warning us of a betrayal, one that cost him his life? Mrs. Carver broke the silence, her voice sharp. You're suggesting he was killed for what he knew about the auction? That's absurd! But her eyes darted to Lady Beatrice, betraying doubt. Clara's voice trembled. He asked me about the brooch, about my aunt. I told you, Monsieur Poirot, he thought it held something hidden. Her words faltered, and Julian placed a hand on her shoulder, silencing her. Thorpe stepped forward, his tone icy. Finch was a meddler. If he was poking into secrets, he got what he deserved. His words were bold, but Poirot noted the sweat on his brow, a crack in his bravado. Sir Henry grunted. The man was always digging up dirt, probably tried to blackmail the wrong person. His eyes flicked to Lady Beatrice, and Poirot caught the hint of accusation. Lady Beatrice raised a hand, her voice steady. Enough speculation. Monsieur Poirot, have you deciphered this code? Poirot smiled faintly. Pas encore, madame, but it speaks of motive, greed perhaps, or revenge. The locket with Monsieur Finch's initials and the stolen book suggest a personal vendetta, and the hidden passage in the east wing. He paused, watching their faces. Clara flinched, Thorpe stiffened, and Lady Beatrice's eyes widened briefly. It suggests the killer knew the manor's secrets. A murmur rippled through the group, and Poirot raised a hand for silence. I ask you now, who among you saw Monsieur Finch with the locket, or heard him speak of the book? No one answered, but the tension was palpable, each guest eyeing the others with suspicion. As the group dispersed, Poirot lingered, his mind turning over the code. 3, 1, 2. The brooch, the book, the locket, the pendant. The blackmail letter tied the locket to a debt, and Finch's betrayal of Lady Beatrice's brother-in-law suggested a motive rooted in the past. The cufflink implicated Thorpe, but Clara's lie and Julian's protectiveness muddied the waters. And Lady Beatrice's silver key, where was it now? A faint creak from the hall drew his attention. Grayson, the butler, hovered near the door, his face pale. "Monsieur Poirot," he whispered, "I found something in the east wing, a scrap of paper near the trap-door." He handed Poirot a torn note, its handwriting matching the blackmail letter. "The book hides the proof." Poirot's pulse quickened. The stolen Great Expectations was the key, and the killer was still active, covering their tracks. The puzzle of the note had narrowed the suspects, but the truth remained just out of reach. The little grey cells. They are close, Poirot thought, his resolve unyielding as he prepared for the final confrontation. Chapter 12. The Gathering of Suspects. The grand hall of Ashwood Manor stood as a monument to its storied past, its vaulted ceiling adorned with frescoes of celestial scenes, its marble floor gleaming under the light of a massive chandelier. The storm had passed, leaving a brittle calm, but within the hall, tension crackled like static. Hercule Poirot had summoned the guests and staff for a gathering, his small figure commanding the vast space as he stood at the centre, his eyes sharp and his moustache impeccably groomed. The suspects, Lady Beatrice Harrow, Clara Wentworth, Reginald Thorpe, Sir Henry Baldwin, Mrs. Evelyn Carver, Julian Marsh, and the butler Grayson, stood or sat in a semicircle, their faces a tableau of fear, defiance, and curiosity. "Ami," Poirot began, his voice resonant. "Tonight, Hercule Poirot will reveal the truth behind the murder of Monsieur Lawrence Finch." The air grew taut as Poirot paced, his hands clasped behind his back. "This crime," he said, "is a tapestry woven of greed, betrayal, and secrets. Let us unravel it, thread by thread." He paused, his gaze sweeping the group. Monsieur Finch was struck down in the gallery, a locked room at 10:30. A bronze statuette was the weapon. A bidding card with the word "Emerald" was in his hand, and a silver locket was missing. Later, a first-edition Great Expectations was stolen. These are not random acts, none. They are connected. Clara Wentworth clutched her shawl, her eyes wide. Thorpe's lips tightened, his frayed cuffs stark against his dark suit. Sir Henry puffed his cigar, while Mrs. Carver's fan fluttered nervously. Julian Marsh stood close to Clara, his expression guarded. Lady Beatrice, poised as ever, met Poirot's gaze, though her hands betrayed a slight tremor. Grayson lingered at the edge, his face pale. Poirot held up the bidding card. "This note, with its code 3142, points to the auction items: the emerald brooch, the book, the locket, the pendant. Monsieur Finch knew a secret about these, oui? A secret worth killing for." He turned to Clara. "Mademoiselle Wentworth, you lied about your whereabouts. You were not at the refreshment table, but near the gallery, n'est-ce pas?" Clara gasped, her hands twisting. I was frightened. I saw Mr. Finch in the hall, arguing, but I didn't kill him." Julian stepped forward, but Poirot raised a hand. And you, Monsieur Thorpe," Poirot continued, producing the silver cufflink with RT engraved. "This was found in the east wing, near a hidden passage to the gallery. You despised Monsieur Finch for a past betrayal. Did you seek revenge?" Thorpe's face reddened. "That cufflink could be anyone's. I was in the ballroom, bidding, as I told you." His voice was sharp, but his eyes darted to Lady Beatrice. Poirot turned to Sir Henry. "Monsieur Baldwin, you spoke of Finch's blackmail attempts over old debts. Did he threaten to expose your financial ruin?" Sir Henry sputtered, his cigar dropping ash. "Nonsense! I had nothing to hide." Mrs. Carver's fan snapped shut. "Really, Monsieur Poirot, this is theatrical nonsense. I was with Julian all evening." But her voice trembled, and Poirot noted her glance at Lady Beatrice. "Monsieur Marsh," Poirot said, his tone softening, "you confessed to tampering with the bidding cards to protect Mademoiselle Wentworth. But was it protection or a cover for your own actions?" Julian's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Poirot faced Lady Beatrice. "Madame, your brother-in-law was betrayed by Finch years ago. Oui? A book with a hidden document sold out from under him, and this silver key—" He paused, watching her flinch. "Does it unlock the service door, or the desk where you hide your secrets?" Lady Beatrice's composure cracked. "You overstep, Monsieur Poirot. My brother-in-law's disgrace was long ago. I invited Finch for his expertise, nothing more." But her voice shook, and Poirot's eyes gleamed. He produced the blackmail letter and the second note found by Grayson. "The book hides the proof. These," he said, "suggest Finch was blackmailing someone about the locket, perhaps tied to the book's secret. The locket, with initials LF, was personal to him. The Great Expectations was stolen to conceal evidence, perhaps a document proving his past betrayal." A murmur rippled through the group. Poirot paced, his voice rising. "The hidden passage in the east wing allowed the killer to enter the gallery unseen. The broken pocket watch, stopped at 10:27, places Finch's death moments before the scream. The voices overheard, debts and no more chances, point to a motive of desperation. But who? He stopped, his gaze piercing. Each of you had reason to hate Finch. Mademoiselle Wentworth, your fear of the brooch's curse and your lie. Monsieur Thorpe, your grudge and the cufflink. Monsieur Baldwin, your debts. Madame Carver, your gossip masking knowledge. Monsieur Marsh, your protectiveness. Madame Harrow, your hidden past. And Monsieur Grayson. He turned to the butler, who flinched. Your trembling hands betray you. Grayson stammered, I only served, sir. But his eyes darted to Lady Beatrice. Poirot raised a hand for silence. The killer used the passage, struck Finch with the statuette, and stole the locket to hide a secret. The book's theft was a desperate act to cover their tracks. But the code, the notes, the passage, they point to one truth. He paused, letting the tension build. Hercule Poirot knows who you are. The guests gasped, their faces a mosaic of fear and defiance. Clara sobbed. Julian gripped her arm. Thorpe glared. Sir Henry coughed. Mrs. Carver paled, and Lady Beatrice's hands clenched. Grayson stepped back, his face ashen. Patience, mes amis, Poirot said, his voice calm but commanding. Tomorrow, when the police arrive, the killer will be revealed. For now, return to your rooms and do not leave the manor." As the group dispersed, their whispers filled the hall. Poirot's eyes followed Lady Beatrice, whose glance at the locked desk in her study lingered in his mind. The puzzle was nearly complete, the threads of motive and opportunity woven tight. The killer's identity was clear to Poirot, but one final piece remained. "The little grey cells, they have spoken," he thought, his resolve unyielding as he prepared for the final act. Chapter 13. The Final Bid. The grand hall of Ashwood Manor was bathed in the pale light of dawn, the storm's remnants leaving a sky streaked with grey. The guests and staff, summoned once more by Hercule Poirot, stood in a tense semicircle, their faces etched with apprehension. The police had arrived at last, their boots echoing in the corridor. But Poirot had insisted on one final gathering, before the law took over. His small, immaculate figure stood beneath the chandelier, his dark eyes gleaming with certainty. "Mes amis," he declared, his voice resonant, "the auction is over, and the final bid is for justice. Hercule Poirot will now reveal the murderer of Monsieur Lawrence Finch." The air was electric. The suspects, Lady Beatrice Harrow, Clara, Wentworth, Reginald Thorpe, Sir Henry Baldwin, Mrs. Evelyn Carver, Julian Marsh, and Grayson the butler, frozen in anticipation. Poirot paced, his hands clasped behind his back, his moustache twitching with purpose. "This crime," he began, "was no act of passion. It was a calculated murder, woven from greed, betrayal, and fear. Let us unravel it." He held up the crumpled bidding card. Monsieur Finch died clutching this, marked with emerald and the code 3142. The brooch, the book, the locket, the pendant. It was a message, but not from Finch. The killer placed it to mislead us. He turned to the auction table, where the emerald brooch gleamed. The brooch, with its rumoured curse and hidden compartment, was a distraction. The true motive lay with the locket and the great expectations. Poirot produced the blackmail letter and the second note. The book hides the proof. These tell of a debt, a secret tied to the locket, engraved with LF, Finch's initials. But the locket was not his. It belonged to Lady Beatrice's brother-in-law, Lionel Harrow, betrayed by Finch years ago over a book containing a deed to a valuable estate. Finch sold it, ruining Lionel, who died in disgrace. The locket, a family heirloom, held a miniature of Lionel, and Finch kept it as a trophy. Lady Beatrice's face paled, her hands clenching. Poirot continued, "Madame Harrow, you invited Finch knowing his history. You sought to reclaim the locket, but someone else acted first." He turned to Clara Wentworth, whose eyes were wide with fear. "Mademoiselle, your lie about the refreshment table placed you near the gallery. You feared the brooch's curse, but it was your aunt's connection to Finch that drove you. She lost her fortune to him, linked to that same deed. You suspected Finch had the locket, a clue to your family's ruin." Clara sobbed, but Poirot raised a hand. "Yet you did not kill him. Your fear was real, but your heart is not that of a murderer." He faced Reginald Thorpe, holding up the silver cufflink. "Monsieur Thorpe, your grudge against Finch was fierce, and this cufflink places you in the east wing, near the hidden passage. But you are too cunning for such a clumsy clue. It was planted to implicate you." Thorpe's jaw dropped, but Poirot moved on to Sir Henry and Mrs. Carver. Monsieur Baldwin, your debts made you vulnerable to Finch's blackmail, but you lacked the precision for this crime. Madame Carver, your gossip hid knowledge of Finch's past, but you were not near the gallery. Julian Marsh stepped forward, his voice tight. Then who, Monsieur Poirot? Stop tormenting us! Poirot's eyes gleamed. Patience, Monsieur Marsh. The killer used the hidden passage in the east wing to enter the gallery, struck Finch with the statuette, and stole the locket to hide its connection to Lionel Harrow. The Great Expectations was taken later, as it held the deed Finch had concealed, an inscribed page proving his betrayal. The broken pocket watch, stopped at 10:27, confirms the timeline. The voices of debts and no more chances were a final confrontation. He turned to Grayson, the butler, whose face was ashen. Monsieur Grayson, your trembling hands betrayed you from the start. You served the Harrow family for decades, loyal to Lionel, who treated you like a brother. When Finch arrived, you recognized the locket, stolen from Lionel's widow. You confronted Finch in the gallery, demanding its return. He refused, mocking Lionel's ruin. In a moment of rage, you struck him with the statuette, using the passage to enter and escape, unseen. Grayson staggered, his voice a whisper. I didn't mean to kill him. He laughed at Lionel's memory, at the pain he caused. The locket was all I had left of him. Tears streamed down his face. Poirot's tone softened. You stole the book to hide the deed, fearing it would expose your motive. The cufflink was a desperate attempt to shift blame to Thorpe. The note with the code was your final misdirection, pointing to the brooch. Lady Beatrice gasped. Grayson, how could you? But her eyes held no surprise, only sorrow, and Poirot knew she had suspected. The police stepped forward, their handcuffs ready. Grayson offered no resistance. His shoulders slumped. I only wanted justice for Lionel, he murmured as they led him away. Poirot addressed the guests. The auction was a stage for old wounds. Greed, betrayal, loyalty. Monsieur Finch paid the price, but justice is served. He bowed slightly, his work complete. As the guests dispersed, their faces heavy with the truth, Poirot stepped into the morning light outside Ashwood Manor. The air was crisp, the storm's chaos gone. Lady Beatrice approached, her voice low. Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. You've saved us from further ruin. Non, madame, Poirot replied. I only reveal what is hidden. The heart, it must heal itself. He tipped his hat and boarded, the waiting car, the manor fading behind him. The little grey cells had triumphed, and Hercule Poirot was content, ready for the next puzzle life would bring.